Have you ever heard of somebody who has been able to heal their body through their mind, through their focused awareness? Have you ever wondered how could such a thing be possible? And is this something that you might be interested in practicing for yourself? Do you have your own personal physical ailments or conditions that you would love to heal? Well, if so, you are in luck because today's guest of the Soulful Self podcast is somebody who has done just that. So, before I get into her introduction, I would love to welcome everybody to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. We have a really interesting story for today. The guest of today's show is named Ann Hince. Ann is an author and speaker who has developed the ability to sense inside her body and release physical tension stored in her connective tissue using solely the focus of her mind. She actually has x-rays to show the physical changes resulting from this inner work, including changing the alignment of her eye sockets, the straightening of her neck, the centering of her lower jaw, and the growth of tooth roots. Can you believe it? Her story is incredible, and I am so honored to have her on the show to share it with us today. So without further ado, let's welcome Ann Hince to the Soulful Self Podcast. All right, I am here with the wonderful, intriguing, and wise Ann Hince. Ann Hince, welcome to the Soulful Self Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Awesome. Yes, we are happy to have you. So I would love if you would introduce yourself to my audience a little bit with sort of an icebreaker question that I ask all of my guests, which is to describe your cultural upbringing and background.
Okay, I'm actually from England. I have a mid-Atlantic accent because I've been living in California for 33 years, but I still have a little bit of an English accent. So if I go back to England, I think I'm American, and here sometimes they think I'm British. So it's a mid-Atlantic accent. But I was actually conceived in New Zealand and adopted in England, and for the age of 16, I lived in Barbados and Sierra Leone in West Africa and Hong Kong and Bahrain. So I've been around the world for sure.
Wow.
During that time, I also went to boarding school. I spent 2 years as a girl boarder in a boys' boarding school, and then the rest of my time, my school years, in a girls' boarding school. So going back and forth to different countries on the vacations. And then I moved out here after I graduated with a computer science degree. And I moved to California when I was 21. And I've been here since.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you've been all over the world and you lived in a lot of different countries, or it was for vacation?
No, we lived in those countries. Yes.
And
then I went
why?
back to England for boarding school.
So what was the purpose of moving around so much?
My dad was in telecommunications, and he just lived in many different countries over his career.
Okay, I see. And you were adopted, correct?
I was, yes.
Okay. So what were some of the challenges that you underwent throughout your childhood, maybe as a result of being adopted or beyond that?
Well, I didn't know, I actually didn't know I was adopted until I was 13. And
Okay.
so I didn't realize how that affected me until later in life. But, during those childhood years, both of my parents became alcoholics. So, there's the surface level of living in all those different countries. And then there's the deeper level of what we experienced at home, which was, it was hell. They were both alcoholics. They both drank throughout the day and the evening. And it was pretty difficult. And then when I was 19, I woke up one morning. I was the only one in the house other than my mother, and I found her dead in the bathroom. So that was a huge trauma that I didn't know how to deal with because we never dealt with anything. So I suppressed it like I suppressed everything else. And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I actually really realized how much I had held on to that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a lot of things to go through. I can relate to some of it. My dad is an alcoholic, and I also grew up in a household where we never talked about our feelings. I think as a culture, we are still trying to understand exactly what feelings are and stop repressing them. But you dropped a bomb right now and said that when you were 19, you found your mother dead. And what was the cause of death for her?
She had throat and lung cancer from smoking and drinking, and
Okay.
something burst. I think a tumor burst in her throat, and she went to the
Yeah.
bathroom and died there. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
knew she had cancer. We had heard about it maybe 6 months ago, and at that point it was already too late to do anything. She didn't even stop smoking, but we only talked about it one day. The day we were told she had cancer, we never mentioned it again. We
Oh,
didn't know how to
wow.
talk about that kind of thing.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Was she getting treatment for it? Or,
no, there was no point. It was already too late.
okay. Yeah. So when it came to processing those feelings around your mother's death, what was that experience like?
Well, I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just scary. My brother knew as little as I did. I
Mhm.
had to get him back to the house. He'd been at his girlfriend's house, and my dad was working in Saudi Arabia at the time. So I had to call him, let him know, and he came back. But there was no processing. He
Mm.
wanted to get rid of all of the things that belonged to her out of the house as soon as possible. So,
Mhm.
and he expected me to do all the work in the house that she used to do, like all the
Oh,
cooking
wow.
and all the
Yeah.
cleaning. That's part of the reason I moved out here when I was 21, because I was not going to stay at
Mm.
home and be essentially his, housemaid.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm really sorry that you went through that, but I know that it is a huge part of your journey with healing and spiritual transformation. And that was something that you revisited later when you found out about EFT, also known as the emotional freedom technique, correct?
It is, yes.
So what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I was a stay-at-home mom with two young boys at the time, and I went to a doctor's appointment. It was just a checkup. I can't actually remember why I went to it, but he realized that I seemed more stressful than I should be in that situation, in the situation I was in. So he asked me what my stress level was on 0 through 10, and I said it was an 8. And he asked me why, and I knew straight away it was because of finding my mother. And because the tears from it were still so close to the surface, right? If I actually thought about the event, the tears would flow. So they were still
Mhm.
really, it was still really affecting me, but I wasn't
Yeah.
conscious of it.
And how old
So
were you at that point?
I was in my late 30s.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the event had been 2 decades earlier, but was
Mhm.
still there. So he worked with me with this tapping process, this EFT, for about 15 minutes. And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story to myself without the tears there. And it felt
Wow.
like such a shift for me. So I realized at that point, okay, there's something to this technique. It seems really simple, and it is really simple, but it's very powerful. So the next day, like a day or two later, we had a 17-year-old cat that needed daily saline shots. We'd just been told that he had to have these, and we were supposed to give them. So the first time I did the shot, my hand was shaking so much. I just wasn't going to be able to do it. It wasn't going to happen. So I thought, okay, well, this is a great test. I can actually try out the technique and see if it makes any difference. So I did. I tapped about my fear of hurting my cat, my fear of giving it an injection, my memories around injections. And the next time, the needle just slid right in. My hand did not shake at all. So
Wow.
it's like, it was amazing to me. It really showed me that this technique was really powerful. So I started using it. I started using it every day. Whenever I felt emotional, I would tap. Maybe I'd go to the bathroom and do it, or, because it's a little weird to see people, tapping on themselves. So,
Right.
but then I wanted more. So I actually wrote down the whole list of emotional memories that I could remember from my childhood. everything that I could remember. And I went through them one a day for a long time until I'd gone through them all and until it felt like there was no emotional charge left around any of these memories. And I found my mind becoming quiet.
Wow, that's very impressive. So this technique, emotional freedom technique, can you explain a little bit more for somebody who might be listening and is not sure what this technique is?
Sure, it's all about finding and accepting our truth, whatever that is. So, it might, to begin with, I realized that we have these different levels of awareness. And when I started out, I wasn't aware. I would say I was not aware. I was aware of words, words, memories, the words around what had happened in the past. So I could say something like, my dad shouted at me. And that's what I would work with to begin with. So the first part of the EFT is you say that. So even though my dad shouted at me, that's my truth in the moment. And it's okay that I feel that way. And the first tapping point is the karate chop point on the side of the hand. So I would say that as I'm tapping on this karate chop point. My dad shouted at me. That's my truth right now. That's all I know. And it's okay that I think that way or feel that way. And then the next point is the very top of the head, the crown point. And so I would just shorten what I'm saying and I'd tap on the top of my head. My dad shouted at me. And then the next point is the beginning of the eyebrow. Tapping there as I'm saying, my dad shouted at me. The next point is the bone on the edge of the eye. My dad shouted at me. The next point is the bone under the eye. My dad shouted at me. The next point is under the nose, on the upper lip. My dad shouted at me. The next point is on the chin. My dad shouted at me. The second to last point is the collarbone point. My dad shouted at me. And then the last point is about 4 inches under the armpit where your bra strap goes across if you have one. My dad shouted at me. And then you take a deep breath, let it out. And that's one round of EFT. And it's so simple. So what you do is you go through that again and again until either the tension has gone. So the tension from your voice might disappear, dissipate. You might start out feeling really anxious as you're saying it. You might just relax into it. It just becomes words. Or something deeper might come up. You might realize, I was actually scared when he was tapping at me. And then you would work on that. So even though I was afraid when dad was shouting at me, that's my truth. And it's okay that I feel that way. And then you just go through that again. I was afraid when dad was shouting at me. I was afraid when dad was shouting at me, tapping through all those points. Mm-hmm. And that's a deeper level of awareness. So as you do this, you're just accepting that thought or that feeling. And as you do so, the tension that's stored inside from that memory starts to release from the body and be gone. It's a permanent shift, which was really nice. That's what I was looking for. I wanted something permanent. I'd done a lot of things in those 2 decades. I'd done a lot of dietary changes and all sorts of things. And it seemed like the shift happened maybe for a week or 2, and then I would start feeling the way I used to feel. So I really wanted something that was permanent. And this, to me, it felt permanent. And it was when I started, when my mind started to become quiet, I realized that the words that I had been replaying in my mind, the ones I used to criticize myself or judge other people, those had been my dad's words that I had been programmed with in childhood. And I just replayed them over and over again. I had to get beyond that. I had to have those words, that voice leave my head in order to be able to really see that that's what was happening. And when my mind was quiet, it felt like I was living in a different reality. It was so different.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a very powerful technique and a very powerful experience that you had, and also how it has the capacity to uncover layers and layers of conditioning and trauma. How recognizing that you had a memory or maybe several memories of your dad shouting at you that didn't feel good, felt intimidated, fearful, all of the things. And to start with that layer and to end up having this deep transformative experience where you realize that your own inner dialogue that wasn't very loving, that wasn't very healthy, was just a mirror of how your caretaker oriented to you growing up. And it does emotional freedom technique. That's the freedom in it, right? Because you can be free from that bondage that keeps you suffering and keeps you in cycles of self-deprecation. Yeah, so I'm really intrigued and fascinated by this. So you went to a doctor and he asked you about your stress levels, and you told him it was very high. And then how many rounds of this tapping sequence did you do in his office?
I don't remember at the time, but
Okay.
I think it was about 15 minutes. It's a doctor's appointment, so it wasn't going to be very long,
Okay.
but I think it was
Yeah.
about 15 minutes. And that was the first layer, like the first level. I had to revisit the experience again because there were all sorts of parts of that event that hadn't surfaced yet. They hadn't bubbled up. So I had to go through the different parts of it, right? The finding had the guilt I felt that she walked past my bedroom in the night when she was in the process of dying because there was a lot of blood in her bedroom. So,
Wow.
that had to come up. And then, calling people, having the police come, having to call my dad, having to find my brother, all these parts of the story had to surface, bubble up to the surface, and I had to let go of them one at a time in order for it to be totally clear. And it's a really interesting process. You're actually opening up the subconscious mind. So it wasn't until later in that process that, and this is kind of a silly, it feels silly to me at this point, but when I was going through it, it wasn't. I got my brother home and he brought his girlfriend with him, and I had never met her before and who she was. And she came in and she made me a cup of black coffee. Now, for some people that was probably a really kind thing. From her, it probably was a really kind thing to do. But I didn't like coffee. And if I had coffee, it had to have sugar and milk in it. So I was mad with her, right? It didn't feel kind to me. So I had to let that come up. But clearly that was not a significant part of the story, but it was something that came up later after I had let go of all the other more traumatic aspects of the story.
Oh, so that was kind of part of the memory, was
Yes,
having that extra agitation,
right.
right?
But it had been hidden underneath all the bigger emotions, right? The anger, the guilt, the fear, all those other emotions had to be addressed first before that smaller part of it bubbled up. And that seems to be the way it is. We our big emotions hide some of the smaller traumas, and it is just a layer by layer process.
So what do you think, reflecting on that, was the significance of uncovering that quote unquote smaller trauma, that smaller annoyance? What were you able to kind of see it from a higher level? Like, okay, she was actually trying to do something really nice for me, and in the moment I didn't realize it. Or were you just purely able to let it go?
As we let the stuck energy, it's just stuck energy to me. As we let that stuck energy go, that's where understanding and compassion arises. So I wasn't able to see at the time that she was trying to do something kind to help me until I
Mm.
let that feeling go, right? That frustration go. Then the compassion and the understanding arose. And that I find that's what happens. That it's almost like it is like the light is underneath the darkness. Once we let the darkness go, and we can get more into that later, the light is already there. The positive, the understanding, the compassion is already there underneath.
Yeah, beautiful. So you started applying this technique to pretty much everything in your life that felt stuck or felt like an issue. You gave the example of your pet, your cat, who needed the injections that were to be administered by you. And it was really difficult at first because you had this fear of needles, and you did some rounds of tapping on it. And then all of a sudden you were able to complete this task with no issues. That's amazing. I think this is beautiful, a beautiful technique that anybody can have access to. So
Yeah.
yeah, and this led to you starting to feel your feelings at some point. And how did that go? And what is the
So
difference between EFT and feeling your feelings?
right. So I realized as I was going through this process, so I said about first being aware of words and then being aware of emotions. Well, underneath every emotion is a set of physical sensations. And we get kind of desensitized from that, as I think in childhood, right? Well, we might see a child, or we might have been the child, right? And we had maybe tension in ourselves somewhere, and someone had said to us, oh, you're feeling angry. And at that point, we start to use the word anger instead of noticing the physical sensations. And it's the same with every emotion. So this is kind of reversing that process. It's expanding the awareness. So I found that I could become aware of the physical sensations, like where I was holding myself tight when I was believing I was feeling some emotion like fear or stress or anger, whatever. There's always a set of physical sensations underneath that. Mm-hmm. So you can tap on that. I could still use EFT with that, with those physical sensations, right? I could say something along the lines of, oh, I can feel this fear in my solar plexus. I can feel this fear as tension in my solar plexus. So I can still use EFT with that, with the physical sensations. Okay. But I was in a group at the time. We were studying A Course in Miracles, and the guy who kind of led the group, he would say every week, it's not about, you don't have to meditate. It's not about meditation. All you have to do is feel your feelings. But when he said that, I was just starting this journey with EFT, and I wasn't aware of what my feelings were, and I didn't know what he meant, and he never explained it. But as the weeks went by and I'd been doing more and more tapping, I started to become aware of what my feelings were. So one day I thought, okay, I'm going to do what he says, because he says it all the time, right? And if I believe he's saying the truth, then I'm going to try and do it. So what I would do is I would be standing at the kitchen sink doing dishes. That's when I would try and do this to begin with. And I would notice that I was thinking a thought that had some kind of emotion behind it. And for me, that was usually fear of some form. So then I would stop what I was doing, notice the physical sensations. It's like, where are they in my body? And normally for me, it was somewhere in my solar plexus, my stomach area. And I would try and feel that. So what does it feel like? And I realized I actually had to hold myself like a statue. I had to hold my breath, hold myself totally still, because if I moved in any way, the feeling wanted to go away. It wanted to disappear because I had been so good at suppressing it. It was used to being suppressed in any way. So I had to kind of reverse that. So I would hold myself as a statue and feel the tension. And I would even talk to it. So, okay, I can feel you in my solar plexus. I can feel that tension. I can feel you right there. And it's okay for you to express yourself. It's okay for you to just be. I'm just going to feel you right now. I'm going to allow you to be there. And as I did that, something would shift, and I would have to take a deep breath, and I would let it out. And then I would think the thought again. Has it shifted? Is it in the same place? Does it feel the same way? Wherever it was, I would do the same thing. Hold myself like a statue, talk to it, keep going until something shifted. Take another deep breath. Then I would do it again. And I would do it again and again until that thought and the emotion had separated. The thought no longer had the feeling or the physical sensation underneath it. And it's just a deeper level of letting that stored energy out of the body. And it took me a long time to get the dishes done, but I got really good at it. Yeah, and now my feelings my emotions are more able to just let go, because I've trained them now that it's okay to be felt.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that experience that you're sharing with how you got in touch with your feeling body, with your emotional body, because a lot of people just don't have access to that aspect of themselves, because like you, they have gone through a lifetime of suppressing it and running away from it. So that sounds like a really creative way that somebody could try to gain access to it by holding themselves like a statue, holding their breath, and really focusing all their awareness on the part of their body that is triggered when they have a certain thought, or when they know that they're in a trigger or some type of emotional response. Absolutely. So I know you mentioned that your goal in doing some of these things was really just about gaining inner peace. However, there were some unexpected side effects, like healing your body. And I would love if you could talk about that.
Sure. Let me just go a little further with my story, because
Go ahead.
it goes further than that. So I was doing this feeling your feeling thing. And so I wanted more. I always wanted more. So instead of doing the EFT at night, what I would do is I would lie on the sofa and start feeling feelings for a good amount of time, probably an hour to an hour and a half every night. I would do this. And because I'd worked through so many of my childhood things, I started to bring up collective traumas. So
so what inspired you to do that? Like, had you heard about it through the Course in Miracles or other spiritual information?
I was just finding in myself what I knew had emotion. So I knew I held emotion around 9/11.
Okay, yeah.
I knew I held emotion around Fukushima and around the tsunami and the Loma Prieta earthquake, which I was in. All of those had emotion in me. So, and I'm working to let go of the emotional, the stored tension inside of me.
So it's more about you, right? Your experience, rather than trying to be of service to the human collective.
Well, I think it's all one and the same.
Okay.
So yes, if I can let go of it, then then we'll talk about the law of attraction in a little bit. But so I was letting this go. Every night I was letting these emotions go. And at some point I realized I could actually hold my awareness inside my body. So imagine you have a toothache or a stomach ache, right? At that point, you know where that feeling is in your body. You can probably pinpoint it with your mind. And but once it's gone, once the toothache is gone or the stomachache is gone, you probably can't get your awareness back to exactly where it was inside anymore because it's gone. What I found is I could keep my awareness inside my body after I had let the tension go, which was really weird. I had never heard of anyone doing this before, so I kind of didn't know what I was doing, but I started playing with it because it just felt like it was the next part of the journey, the next step. So I started moving my awareness around inside and realized I could find tension inside, and which I realized is in the connective tissue. So now I was holding my awareness on the physical tension itself on the inside and holding my awareness there, just like I was doing with feeling your feelings and with EFT, but now I'm doing it at a deeper level, holding my awareness on the tension long enough that it would dissipate or shift. And eventually I could keep my awareness inside my head. It took a while to actually be able to get to inside my head. And I'm doing the same thing, finding tension, feeling it for long enough that it releases. But because I'm in my head now, so I'm close to my ears and everything, I could actually hear it release. And it sounds like old fabric and it feels like old fabric ripping. And that's when I started to realize that it's really releasing tension in the connective tissue. And so I've been doing this at a deeper and deeper level. And then I recently had x-rays taken, new x-rays from my orthodontic work. And looking at that new one compared to 2013, I have shifted the whole structure of my skull. I mean, my eye socket to the lines, my jaw, which was way off to the side, is now much more centered. And my neck, I have scoliosis, and my neck is straightening out. And even it looks like maybe my tooth roots have grown. So just amazing.
That's incredible.
To see what this work is doing.
That's amazing. Tooth roots growing, your spine straightening after a lifetime, right, of having scoliosis and having it not be straight. That's incredible. It's a real testament to the power of our focused awareness and how we can use our mind to create changes in our body, how we can restructure our inner realms to change our outer realms.
Right. Now when I think this is the original meaning of the word insight. You know, we hear about insight a lot, but to me, it's actually going into the physical. I think I know I did when I always heard about it in the past, when I thought about insight, it was like kind of going into the mind or going into the spiritual realm. But I'm actually almost coming out of the mind or just using the sensing mind and not the thinking mind, which is different than I think what we hear about outside. So when I'm feeling inside, I'm not thinking, I'm just feeling, right? Which is slightly different than what we hear. And that's kind of why I'm sharing my story, because I know there's this different aspect that we haven't heard about much.
Right, right. It's more of the awareness, which
Yes.
is behind the thinker. It's the one observing the thoughts and the sensations in the body. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really important to make that differentiation for sure. Wow, so that's incredible. And speaking of the law of attraction, what is your understanding of that concept?
Okay. Yeah. This has been really helpful to me. It propelled me along the path once I started to realize that, the law of attraction is working all the time. Every second of every day, we are emitting a signal and we're attracting back based on that signal. So I'm not talking about the manifestation part of the law of attraction, which again is kind of what's out there in the collective. I'm just talking about us. We are a signal and we are emitting a signal all the time. So I would actually start asking myself during the day, so how am I feeling right now? And do I want to feel this way again in the future? And then most of the time it was no, I don't want to feel this way again. So then I need to change my signal right now. And so I would tap, or even just taking a deep breath and relaxing. That means the signal you're putting out is slightly more relaxed, and what you're attracting in the future is slightly more relaxed. So I wanted a deeper change. I wanted real change on a deep, deep level. So that's when I realized that, the trauma that we hold inside of ourselves is probably the biggest part of our signal. So that's when I was working with the EFT, the feelings, because that changes the physical part of our signal, which is a big deal. So that asking myself each day, how am I feeling right now? Do I want to feel that way again? And if not, then it's I have the power to change my signal right now, whether it's just taking a deep breath. I don't recommend the suppression methods. We have a lot of suppression methods that we use these days. So like even the positive thinking, right? If I try and think positively, I'm suppressing what I'm actually thinking, which doesn't release it from the body. I want to release it from the body. So if I tap to accept what I am feeling, whatever it is, and I've done some really deep feeling work. So I tapped on myself that I hate myself. I tapped on that for a long time, for probably hours, that I hate myself. And once I get to the place that it's fine, it's okay. It's okay that I hate myself. It doesn't matter. The power of the words has gone, right? The words I hate myself no longer has any power over me.
Yeah.
So it's just accepting whatever it is that I'm feeling in the moment. And then it just releases its power over us, and it raises us up. It cleans us out, right? Because I can sense on the inside now, I can sense light and darkness. So once I hold my awareness on the tension inside and then it releases, at that point, I realized what was there was dark and it's now light. Kind of like my dad, I couldn't see that he was in my head until he was gone. And then I could look back and say, oh, that was my dad in my head. Same way with the light and darkness. Once the tension is gone, then I can see that it's light and it was dark. So that's all we have to do. All we have to do is find, it's easy to say, all we have to do is find all the negative inside of us, all the tension that we stored inside of us, and release it. We don't have to do the sticking the positive on the top. We just have to do the releasing the negative that's stored there, because the light is already there underneath.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. You said so many powerful things right now. And just the general theme of us not avoiding our negative emotions, but rather confronting them and working with them, working through them, because ultimately that is the only way, right? We can't skip them. We can't go around it. We can't get over it. We have to go through it. And that's so true. And when you're talking about tapping and we say these statements that can feel highly negative, like I hate myself, right? So that might sound counterintuitive to somebody who is not versed in the world of EFT, but it really is with that goal in mind, that we're acknowledging that this really difficult, challenging thought and feeling and state of being of I hate myself exists within within me. And so I'm bringing it to the surface, and we're tapping these meridian points on our bodies in order to release that, just like you said. And as it happens, the feeling, a number of things could happen, right? In your case, the words didn't have as much weight on them. In someone else's case, it might be a doorway into a deeper understanding of why they feel that way, right? It could lead to some memory surfacing, or it could lead them to understanding why they have these feelings of hating themselves, right? Just there's so many different avenues. And I also wanted to mention that the tapping process is very intuitive, right? There's not a prescribed methodology, like you have to do this many cycles, you have to do 5, or you have to do 10. You just have an open mind and you approach it like anything else, with an attitude of exploration, and allow it to guide you, checking in with yourself, taking that deep breath after a round of tapping and saying, okay, how do I feel? Do I need to do more? Do I need to shift it into something else? Right? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Or your words might shift. There's a lot of videos about EFT online, and a lot of people use scripts, and that's using someone else's word. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to go down the neural pathway that you have stored inside of you, and the wording might be slightly different, right? You're trying to find that emotional charge, right? So something like, I hate myself, might be a really charged thought for me, in which case it's a good thought for me to think about or to tap on. But for someone else, it might have no charge. And if it has no charge, now it could be that they're not aware that the charge is there yet. But if that's the case, there's probably another thought that they need to work on right now that does have some charge, and it might lead them to the place. I didn't get to that place of tapping on, I hate myself to begin with. I had to let go of a lot of other layers first. And then I realized that had charge and I need to work on that. But unless it has some kind of connection to you, then there's no point tapping on it, right?
Right.
Someone who's never been to a hospital, or has never had anyone die in a hospital, or never had anyone work in a hospital, the word hospital has nothing in them. It has no charge in them. But someone who has been to a hospital, maybe had surgery or had someone die in hospital, even the word then for them, hospital, has some charge to it, and they can tap just on the word hospital, and it will start to release the tension stored inside of them about that word. But it's specific for each person, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really does take us getting in that observer seat to say, okay, what am I triggered by? It could be something as simple as a word. And we might be so busy with our day-to-day lives that we don't realize it. But when we start to invoke these processes of self-awareness, then we start to gain so much more insight on multiple levels.
Yeah. And it's really fun to experience the expansion of awareness, but even to know that that's possible. Because when I started this, I didn't know. So at the beginning, before COVID, I had a group and we would meet once a week. And at the beginning of the group, it was a tapping group, but at the beginning, I would have everyone sit in a semicircle and I would play a series of chakra chimes. And then everyone would come back together, open their eyes, and we would share what we experienced. And some people would only hear the sound vibrations with their ears, and that's kind of logical. That's kind of what we think of. But there were other people that would hear it with their ears, but also feel those sound vibrations in some parts of their body. And then on the other end, there were some people who would feel those sound vibrations throughout their bodies. So to me, that was a really interesting idea, because now the people who only hear with their ears know there's this experience that they can aim for that they've not yet experienced, but they can look towards it. And then the people who have this deep awareness already know that there are people out there who don't, right, who only hear at a surface level. And it's this huge range of awareness and depth to life, right? Because those people who feel throughout their body, imagine how they feel when they're hearing music, beautiful music, compared to the people who only hear it with their ears. There's a huge depth to life that those people who just hear it have not yet attained. but they can now search for it because they know it's available and other people have experienced it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what happens when we start to shift and elevate in consciousness. When we expand our awareness, is we experience life on a whole new level. And sometimes it can feel like having been reborn. I went through one of these recently, and it was like, um, from that point on, because I engaged in a plant medicine ceremony and also have been developing conscious community and have just been on the spiritual path for a long time in general. But it was like I reached a point where a lot of things shifted for me, and I couldn't even listen to a lot of the old top 40 music that I used to enjoy anymore. And now it has to be all spiritual music with really loving, positive messages that remind me the truth of who I am as a spiritual being. Right. And so what you're speaking to for me just brings that up, because some people just go through life 9 to 5, constantly grinding and experiencing the world through such a limited set of perceptions, when in the present moment, there's so much more to experience. And when we start to awaken and we stop rejecting our feelings and labeling them as wrong, it's a pathway in to complete bliss.
Yeah, it is incredible. A pathway. Now, so let me go a little bit more with what you just said, because I kind of felt the same way, and I spent a long period of time not watching the news and not going to places that felt uncomfortable. But then, kind of like with the collective traumas, I actually now want to know what triggers me, because then I can work at a deeper level. So I will listen to the news now. I haven't got to the point where I'll listen to some music, because I haven't got there yet, but hopefully I will. But I will seek out what triggers me so that I can release that at a deeper level, because I think we want to get to the point where we are totally imperturbable, where nothing sends us right into an uncomfortable place, where we can be anywhere with anyone doing anything and we are at peace. So it just takes searching it out at a deeper level.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I was listening to something earlier today where they're having a conversation about the energy of the new earth and how a lot of people choose not to watch the news, but this particular person chooses to watch the news and kind of use it as an assignment to uncover deeper layers of herself, and to also read between the lines and see where humanity is moving in a more awake direction. And so for me, this is a point of contention, because as I become more aware and I become more sensitive, my level of discernment also increases. So things that I used to enjoy, like going to a dance club or a bar, right? Like I don't go to those places anymore. And it's like, okay, on one level, part of the goal of awakening spiritually and ascending consciousness is, like you said, to have this unshakable sense of inner peace where you can do anything with anyone. You don't need anything outside of you to change, to feel completely still and good within your center. But on the other hand, for me, having this discernment kind of shows me how to be more loving to myself and how to make better choices, how to not be around lower vibrations, because that's what I have available to me within the power of choice. So it's an interesting dichotomy, right? What do you think?
It is. Yeah. It is. So the question then becomes, is like, are you not going there because there is some resistance inside of you to going there? Because if so, that is tension inside of you that you can look at and release. Or are you totally happy to go there or not go there? That is when we're at peace, right? So if we let go of the tension, because if we really are all one, if we are all connected, then it's finding that resistance we have to each other and to each experience that actually allows us to feel like we are all one. So we have to find that resistance and let it go. so that we're quite happy to eat anything or to be with anyone and not be in resistance to it. So that's, to me, that's where finding that resistance is inside of us, and it's just in stuck energy inside of us. Find it and feel it and let it go.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I think that's really valuable. And I'm wondering, have you always been on this spiritual journey, or did it start when you started tapping?
It's an interesting question because I don't really know. I mean, I think it started when I started tapping, but I've always kind of been interested in it. And there was at one point, so I was told I was adopted when I was 13, and I met my birth mother when I was 17. She'd actually been handed the wrong adoption papers at the transfer, saw our last name, worked out where my dad lived because there was only one big employer in that area. She had a cousin who was in the same company and got the company magazine. So she was allowed, or she was able to follow us around the world, kept in touch, or she knew where we were, and contacted us when I was 17. So I met her at that point. And then my adopted mother died when I was 19. So it's like I was handed over for 19 years and then kind of handed back. And it just felt like such a weird experience to me. I knew there had to be some reason, because it was such a crazy story. So I knew there was some reason. So that was just an early inkling, maybe, that something was going to happen along the way. But yes, I didn't really, I had no awareness until I was in my late 30s and started doing this work.
Yeah. So it was kind of like you noticed certain synchronicities happening in your life, or certain signs, right?
Signs, yeah. Synchronicities didn't really start happening until the last 10 years or so. And now they're crazy. They're so fun.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, it's incredible to experience those and to know that it's a higher consciousness, the universe, God, source, whatever people call it, right?
Yeah. Can I share a fun one that happened recently?
Yeah, go ahead. Of course.
Because when a few years ago, I didn't really understand synchronicities and what they were. So a couple of weeks ago, my son asked me, well, what car do you want, Mum? If you wanted whatever car you could have, what car would it be? And there aren't many. I love my cars, so there aren't many. But the only one I could think of was a Mercedes AMG GT, which happens to be a car I like. And then a couple of days later, was walking my dogs with my husband, and I was talking about podcasts. People wanted to know how to say my last name, which is Hince. And I always used to say, well, it rhymes with mince, but that's more of an English word than an American. So I said, I could also say quince or prince. So we decided Prince was probably the best one. And then the next day I went to stay with a friend in Santa Cruz, and we went for ice cream. And one of the specials for the day was quince ice cream. Now, how often do you see the word quince written down?
Never.
I don't.
I actually never knew what that word was till right now.
Okay, it's a fruit.
Okay.
So I took a photo of it and sent it to him. And then from there, we crossed the road to a restaurant. And as we crossed the road, a Mercedes AMG GT, which is a very rare car, pulled up and parked outside the restaurant. It was just so fun.
Yeah.
And that's what I think they are. I believe they're just there to make life fun, just to show you how the universe is playing with us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I bet that was a fun experience to have it, especially when you're in the experience and it's all happening to you and you have that inner knowing that, okay, it is the universe, right? The universe is listening. The universe knows me. Yeah.
And to have the awareness to notice, because I think a lot of times we just don't notice when it happens.
Yeah, that's true. And that in that moment, it can be a catalyst for our spiritual growth as well, because it turns our attention back to the spiritual nature of life, which sometimes we can stray away from, having all these worldly 3D experiences, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to go back very quickly before we wrap up to the idea of the collective, right? So you were feeling some of the feelings associated with collective traumas like 9/11 and so on. And I want to know your perspective on how does healing at the individual level affect us on a collective scale?
I believe it's kind of all one and the same. And, it's a holographic universe. So every one of us is in a part of a reflection of one of us in each of us. So if we do this work individually, it is affecting the collective. Right? And right now we have so much that's coming up in the collective to be looked at, right? All these things that have been hidden, they're actually coming up now. So I believe they're coming up for us to notice how we're feeling. And there's a lot of feelings, and actually let that stuck energy pass through us. Because once it does, it doesn't matter what side of all these issues we're on. All it matters is what we're feeling about them, right? So we probably have a lot of anger and frustration and fear. If we bring that up and just let it pass through, then we can come together in peace in the middle. But it takes releasing that charged energy to do that.
Absolutely, right. Because within the school of thought of the law of attraction and the manifestation, people are always talking about how your inner reality creates your outer reality, right? So that is true on the micro level, on the level of the individual, and on the macro level, the level of global society and the human collective. So when we go within ourselves, to release the tension and to feel the feelings, then it reverberates on a much bigger scale. I totally agree with that. And you have written a beautiful book that talks about all of the things that we discussed today and more. Would you care to tell listeners about that book?
Sure. It's called A Pathway to Insight, because there may be others, or probably are. So it's really the steps that I took. I really explained the law of attraction, my belief about the law of attraction, and how we get programmed in childhood, how that gets stored in our connective tissue. And then I talk about the different steps that we just talked about that I went through to actually be able to put my awareness on the inside. And I talk about them in detail and the different things that happened along the way, because there are some kind of weird things that happen along the path.
Yeah. So if any listener is feeling inspired by what we talked about today, I highly recommend checking out Ann Hince's book. And where else can listeners find you if they want to connect?
Sure. I have a website, which is my name, annhince.com. I have a YouTube channel where I have some videos that talk about some of these things more in depth. And I have a public Facebook page that I'm really enjoying right now. If people want to go on there and check out some of the things that I'm kind of translating memes and quotes that people have into what I believe is, the truth from my perspective. So I'd love to see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, we will link to those in the show notes as well. I know on Anne's website, she has pictures of those x-rays she talks about that show the actual structural shifts before and after that took place in her body when doing this EFT and feeling her feelings. So those are always interesting to look at. But other than that, this was an amazing show. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and your wisdom.
You're welcome. Thanks for the great conversation.
Absolutely. And thank you to our wonderful listeners. This has been another episode of the Soulful Self Podcast. I will talk to y'all next week.